To discuss now with Eric Ham. He is our CTV News political analyst. Good morning to you, Eric. So let's begin in North Carolina, where early voting gets underway. What do you think this means for the Harris team? What do you think this means for the Trump team?
Well, I think it's a moment that they both have been eagerly anticipating, and certainly they are looking for turnouts like we saw in Georgia on Tuesday, where they shattered their record there. But of course, we know North Carolina has had some problems of late after having been struck by two massive hurricanes. So it's unclear what the turnout will look like or if they will get the levels that they've expected. But clearly, what we're beginning to see now, this race is heading to the finish line and early voting underway shows that there is a tremendous level of enthusiasm for both sides.
For both sides. And yet, in the past, former President Trump had really been critical of early voting, almost discouraging his supporters from taking part in early voting. Has that changed?
He has actually gone back and forth on this issue, like many issues we have seen from Donald Trump, where he will say vote early, but he also will then follow up and say, but the best way to ensure that your vote actually counts is to vote in person. So again, it's unclear how Donald Trump supporters are going to take some of the language that he has said around early voting. But I think when we look at, particularly in Georgia, where you had more than 300,000 people show up, I have to believe that some of those people were, in fact, there for Donald Trump himself.
All right, we have to talk about Harris's interview with Fox News. She was in the Fox's den during that testy exchange with Brett Baier. What was your key takeaway? What stood out for you from that 30-minute exchange?
This came off like a debate, and we know Kamala Harris, after that first debate, had been looking for another viral moment. And I think this is why she did this interview. And yes, it was very combative, very testy, and things got heated like as soon as the interview started. And I think that's what Kamala Harris actually wanted. Kamala Harris certainly stood her ground. And I think what we're going to see is the Harris team not only won, I think, the news cycle with this interview yesterday, but I think they're going to continue to play this interview up that to actually showcase that Kamala Harris is, in fact, a fighter and that she can take tough questions from people from the press, even speaking to a media outlet that isn't traditionally a benefit to her.
Yeah, and perhaps some viewers had never really heard her unedited before, and there she was. And lastly, then, I have to ask you about former President Trump calling himself the father of IVF. He did that during the Fox town hall yesterday. That room was filled with women who were Trump supporters. What do you make of himself, make of him calling that of himself? Does that help him win over female voters, a demographic that we know he really struggles with?
No, not at all. In fact, what we are seeing from polling data is that there's a massive gender gap in this election already. And I think more importantly, Kamala Harris has closed the gap with perhaps Donald Trump's most important demographic, which is white women. And I think one of the reasons for that is because of this issue of reproductive rights. Kamala Harris has polled very, very well on this issue. And while Donald Trump does well on issues like the economy and immigration, we have to remember that in the United States, the biggest demographic of voters are actually white women. And while that has always been Donald Trump's superpower, he won white women in 2016 and in 2020. It looks like Kamala Harris has actually closed that gap with that demographic. And I think what we're seeing here is Donald Trump and Republicans continuing to twist themselves into knots to try to get this issue right. But it just simply doesn't work for them. And Kamala Harris is actually taking advantage of that, especially when you have a number of key battleground states that has this issue of abortion and reproductive rights on the ballot as well.
Eric Ham for us this morning. Eric, thank you so much. Good to see you.